All right, so welcome back for another deep dive. And today we're going to kind of shift gears a little bit.
Okay.
And look at something pretty foundational, I think, to, how we function as a society.
Right.
And that's systems of governance and how we can actually participate in, shaping our society.
Okay.
And this is going to be really interesting because the source material that we're using for this deep dive is a Year 5 Citizenship guide.
Interesting.
So it's really fascinating to kind of unpack these concepts that are, pretty complex adult ideas.
Yeah.
But they're explained in a way that is, for young learners.
Right.
And so it kind of gives you a fresh perspective.
Yeah, I'm really curious to see what angle they take on these things. You know, when you're explaining it to kids, you have to simplify it. Sometimes that makes it much clearer.
Totally. And I think sometimes we overcomplicate things as adults.
Absolutely.
So this guide, lays out the three, pillars, I guess you could say, of UK governance. And that's Parliament, the government, and the monarch.
All right. So the classic kind of three branches.
Yeah, it's almost like a constant balancing act between them.
Yeah, a little bit of a triangle.
Yeah.
Power going on there.
Yeah.
So Parliament is where laws are made. It's the sort of birthplace of laws. We have the House of Commons and the House of Lords. The House of Commons is all those elected MPs that represent different areas of the UK.
Right.
And then the House of Lords has its own kind of separate role with people appointed to it.
Okay.
And so you have proposed laws that go through these houses. They get debated, they get refined and changed. And then eventually, if everything gets passed and everybody agrees, it becomes a law.
Okay. So it's not just like one person making all the decisions.
No, it's a whole process.
Yeah.
And the government is really important here because they're the ones who sort of drive the lawmaking. They come up with the ideas for the laws and they try and get them through Parliament.
So who's the government then?
So the government is formed by the party. That gets the most MPs elected to the House of Commons.
Okay.
So if you imagine an election and one party gets the most seats, they get to form the government.
Okay. So it's not as simple as just one person making all the calls.
Right. It's a whole system of people working together.
But there is somebody who leads the government, right?
Ah, you're talking about the prime minister. So the prime minister is the head honcho.
Okay.
They're the ones who lead the government. They set the agenda. They make the big decisions.
Right.
But, and here's the important thing, they're not all powerful.
Okay.
They have to work within the framework of Parliament.
Yeah.
And they're accountable to the people.
Right.
Because remember, the UK is a democracy. That means the people have the power. It's the voters who decide.
Okay. Yeah, and I think that that's a point that this guide really drives home, this idea of accountability.
Yeah.
Especially when it talks about the justice system.
Right.
That's a safeguard, isn't it?
It is. It's like the rules of the game, making sure everyone plays fair.
Right, exactly. And so this guide explains, in pretty simple terms, how courts and trials work, to ensure fairness for everyone.
Right.
So you have the defendant, who's the person accused of breaking the law. You have the judge, who oversees the whole process.
Overseeing everything.
And then you have the jury, which is a group of everyday citizens who are tasked with, weighing the evidence and determining guilt or innocence.
I get to decide.
Yeah. And there's this fundamental principle that's at the heart of it all.
What's that?
Innocent until proven guilty.
A cornerstone of the justice system.
Yeah. But beyond voting and participating in the justice system, what are some ways that we can actually make our voices heard and, influence change?
Well, that's where it gets really interesting because the guide brings up this concept of pressure groups.
Oh.
Have you heard of pressure groups before? So pressure groups are basically groups of people who come together to advocate for a specific issue they care about.
Okay.
So it could be anything. It could be about protecting the environment. It could be about improving healthcare.
Right.
It could be about making their local community a better place.
Okay.
And the idea is that when people unite and work together, they can have a much bigger impact.
It's like that old saying, there's strength in numbers.
Exactly.
Yeah.
One voice might not be heard, but when you have lots of voices together, it's much harder to ignore.
Yeah. But the guide also emphasizes that you got to go about this the right way.
Yes. It's all about using your voice responsibly. You can't just go around breaking the law to get what you want. It's about using legal and ethical methods.
Okay, so what does that look like?
Well, think about things like peaceful protests. signing petitions, writing to your MP.
Okay.
Or even just talking to people about the issues you care about. It's about making your voice heard.
Right.
But doing it within the framework of the law.
So then towards the end of the guide, there's this kind of seemingly unrelated topic. Is the waste hierarchy.
Waste hierarchy. What's that all about?
Well, it basically says that, reducing consumption is the best thing we can do for the environment.
Okay.
But how does that tie into this whole thing about, citizenship and responsibility?
That's a good question. I think it's a subtle but important point. It's about recognizing that our individual choices, even small ones, can have big impacts.
Right.
If we all reduce our consumption, it helps protect the environment. It helps conserve resources. It's about thinking beyond ourselves.
Okay.
And considering the bigger picture.
So it's not just about knowing how the government works, but it's also about, understanding our own role in that system.
Exactly. And acting responsibly.
Yeah.
It's about being an active and informed citizen.
That's a great takeaway. And it really leaves us with a lot to think about.
It does.
If you could start your own pressure group, what issue would you focus on?
That's a good question. I'll have to have a think about that.
Yeah, me too. And how would you use your voice to, create that positive change within the system? Keep those questions in mind as you continue your deep dive. Until next time.